I look around, and there's so much chaos in the world around me. Everybody is yelling and screaming about anything and everything, and everybody says that I'm supposed to pick a side. But if I pick one side, the other side hates me, and I'm supposed to hate them. And Jesus says that I'm the light of the world, and he tells me to let my light shine. Most days, I don't feel like the light of the world. And in the New Testament, it says we should walk in a manner worthy of our calling and to imitate Christ with our lives. But most days, I feel like anything but an imitation of Christ. I want to be different. I want to be a light in the darkness, but I don't know how in the world I'm supposed to do it.
Well, thanks for being here. We are starting this new series called How in the World. We're going to take 4 weeks, and we're going to start today, and we're going to look at how in the world we have any ability to walk in this life and be an example of Christ and live our lives as an expression of Christ in us. We're going to look at the power behind the calling that we have, and then the next 3 weeks we're going to follow that up, and we're going to look specifically at what that might look like here in this world and how in the world we can even do what we're called to do or be who we're called to be. And so if you miss any of the following weeks, you can always go back and you can get caught up on our website, heritagechurch.org. You can download the app. Any smartphone or mobile device, you can download it right there. You can go get caught up. And if you have some friends that you've been investing in, inviting them to come to church, and you think, you know what, this is a perfect time for them to come in, you can send them to the side of the app, and they can get caught up in today's message moving forward. So I want to encourage you in that. Before we get into our conversation today, I do want to encourage you. Saw the announcement about guest services. If you've been kind of thinking about or interested in getting plugged in guest services in some way, shape, or form, or maybe you're just not sure where you want to get plugged in, but you know you want to take your next step, come to lunch following this immediately after. You don't have to have signed up. Just show up over there. We've got childcare taken care of. We've tried to eliminate any excuse that you might have to come and check out how you can partner with us to help us reach those who come in to our doors each and every Sunday. Now, before we get into our message today, and to set it up really, I want to use something that is both something that I enjoy and something that irritates me, both at the same time. Any of you fans of church signs? Some of you shaking your heads. Some of you are like, not all of them. I get it, because some of them are really clever and really smart, and I appreciate those. And some of them make me chuckle, and I laugh at the cleverness behind them. Some of them are absolutely ridiculous, very condemning, very legalistic. Some of them are way off base theologically. You don't even have to know much about the Bible. You read it and you're like, I don't think that's right. Some of them, they put something up and then 2 years later it's the same thing. Like, what's the point of having it, right? But I want to share a couple of them, some of my favorites, to kind of get us into our message today. This first one, give Satan an inch and he will be your ruler. You got to love the good puns, right? Those are always good and real encouraging. Yeah, give him an inch and he'll be your ruler. Okay, next one. Try Jesus. If you don't like him, the devil will take you back. Now, how ridiculous is that? You have my word. I will never encourage you to just try Jesus. And if you don't like it, you can go back to the devil. All right? That's not our message here. That's pretty silly. Even if you're not a church person, you're like, that's so dumb. All right? Keep going. You can walk with God. You can't walk with God when running with the devil. My understanding, Van Halen was touring the week that they put this up in this area. I don't think they drove by and saw the sign. If they did, they probably still sing the song anyway. All right, keep going. Now, this one was local. This is one of my favorite ones. Want a faith lift, pews inside. Now, how powerful are those pews to be able to lift up your faith just by coming and sitting in the pews, right? All right, and then this one. Jesus died for you. The least you can do is live for him. You guys heard that before? Anybody ever heard that? Maybe you've been taught that, right? And maybe that's something that has been used to try and guilt you into living a certain way. That Jesus died for you, so the least you can do is live for him, right? And this built off of this passage here in 1 Corinthians, where Paul makes this statement. about Jesus' death. It says, the love of Christ controls us. Having concluded this, that one died for all, therefore all died. And it says, and he died for all, so that they who live might no longer live for themselves, but for him who died and rose again on their behalf. And so what has happened is this verse has been taken that he died, and so those who believe in him and those who follow him should live for him. And so it turns into, Jesus died for you, the least you can do is live for him. And so logically, what our minds start doing is going down this path of, okay, well, if the least I can do is live for him, then what's the least I have to do to live for him? And so then we want to know what we have to do to live for him. And so we ask the question, tell me what I need to do, and then I'll do it. Because we're looking for the minimum requirement that we have to do, because the minimum requirement is that we just live for him. So the least we can do is live for him. So what's the least I can do? Tell me what the least is that I can do, and that's what I'll do. And that thinking and that mentality is the same thought process that the Israelites found themselves in thousands of years ago. They're talking to Moses. They said, Moses, go talk to God and tell him to tell us what to do, and then we'll do it. And so Moses goes up on the mountain. He comes back down. He says, all right, I got all these laws and these rules, these demands that God says are his law, and it's perfect and it's holy, and if you live up to them, then you too will be perfect and holy. And then they say, okay, we'll do it. And he's like, I don't think you understand what I just said. He said, no, just tell us what to do and we'll do it. So he goes back up. He starts getting the law in its entirety. He comes back down. He can't even get back down the mountain with the laws before they're breaking the laws. And so when we look and we see this idea and this thought process that Jesus died for us, so what's the least we can do? So tell us what we have to do and we'll do it. Process that Jesus died for us, so I owe him something. Right? And we sing about it. And I love hymns. I do. I love hymns, some of them. It reminds me of when I was a child growing up in church. And I didn't have a bad church experience when I was a kid. Some of that came later on in life, but when I was a kid, I went to church with my grandmother a lot, and I would sit by her, and she would sing, and these hymns remind me of her singing out of tune. And as weird as it is, I don't listen to that driving down the road, but I think about her singing out of tune, and it's good memories of my grandmother. But then we sing, Jesus paid it all to him I owe, as if we owe him a debt that he already paid, that we sing about in the next song. My debt has been paid. So which is it? Do we still owe him a debt, or has my debt been paid? Because when we come into this mindset that we have to do something to pay off a debt, or that we owe Jesus something, or that he died for us, so the least that I can do is live for him, then we get into this thought process of wanting to know what we need to do, so tell me to do that, and I'll do it. But here's the crazy thing. When you have that idea and that thought process about tell me what to do and I'll do it, or tell me what not to do and I'll keep from doing that, what you're trying to do is live a life worthy of your calling, to live a life that would be an expression of Christ. You want to walk in a manner worthy of your calling. You want to be a light in the darkness. You want to let your light shine. But you're wanting to know these lists of do's and don'ts so you can do those, and that would exemplify your life. But what happens, this is the crazy thing. If you get this and understand it, it can start to put aside some of that religion that has been weighing you down for so long. That when you ask for those demands, or when someone puts those demands on you, sin rears its ugly head in your life. Because the law isn't the problem. You go into the New Testament, you read this side of the cross, you read that the law is holy. And that the law is not the issue is sin. And the really ironic thing about it is that when someone puts law or religion, demands, expectations, requirements on you, then sin finds opportunity in that to produce in you all kinds of sin. Look at it this way. When in Romans Romans 7, Paul says this. He makes it very clear. He says, sin, taking opportunity through the commandment, produced in me coveting of every kind, for apart from the law, sin is dead. Paul said, I didn't even know what coveting was until the law comes in and says, do not covet. And then sin, finding opportunity in the demand that was placed on me, produced in me coveting of every kind. So then I start coveting when somebody says, don't covet. That's not how it's supposed to work. When somebody puts demands and expectations on you. But look at it like this. When religion demands, sin produces. When religion demands, when we talk about religion, it's that expectation and the demands of the law and the ones that are picked and chosen out of the Old Testament law and brought into where we are today, and it's mixed with men's tradition and man's expectation and denominational requirements and all these things that are mixed in together, and it's all clouded up. That's religion, all lumped into one. It boils down to what you can do for God. But look at it like this. Religion demands, sin produces. So for instance, if religion demands that you not covet, guess what sin produces? Coveting. Ain't that something? When religion demands that you not lust, guess what sin produces? Lusting. Religion demands there are no idols. Guess what sin produces? Idolatry. And let's go to the other side. Instead of don't do this, religion demands that you behave properly. Well, sin produces defiance. Every single time. Every single time. But here's the hard thing for us today, because so often we can go in this word and we can pull things out of passages in the New Testament. And we can pull it out and we can read things that we are encouraged as believers to live in a certain way. And we can pull those out, and that can become religion. And we pull that out, and it becomes a list of demands. I want to read through a couple of different passages in a couple of different books. And I want you to look at it as a whole. It's not on the screen because I want to take it in its whole context. But you can go back later today. We're going to be in these 3 books today, and I want to paint the whole picture for everything that we're talking about. But you go into Galatians. If you just start in chapter 5, you can pull these out, and Paul says, do not walk according to the flesh, that old thought process and those old habits and mindsets that you had prior to coming to know Christ. That's what the flesh is. It comes into this new life that we have, and it brings up those thoughts and those temptations that we can give into. He says, don't walk by that. He says, now the deeds of the flesh, it's immorality, impurity, sensuality, idolatry, sorcery, enmity, strife, jealousy, outbursts of anger, disputes, dissensions, factions, envying, drunkenness, carousing, things of this like. He says, don't do those things. And then we can go over here to Colossians, and he tells us also like what not to do. Like this isn't what it looks like to be a new believer. He says, put these things aside: anger, wrath, malice, slander, abusive speech. Don't lie to one another. He also tells us some things that we can do that it looks like life in Christ. Here again in Colossians 3, he says, be kind and compassionate, be humble, gentle, patient, bear with one another, forgive one another. If you have a complaint against someone, forgive them just as God forgave you. We go back into Galatians, that passage that we were just looking at. He says, the fruit of the Spirit, don't walk in the flesh, walk in the Spirit, and the fruit looks like this: joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Flip over to Romans chapter 12, starting in verse 10, go through the end of the chapter. There's just broken up. There's a whole list that you could derive up. It says, be devoted to one another, give preference to one another, rejoice in hope, persevere in tribulation, devote yourself to prayer, contribute to the needs of the saints, practice hospitality, bless those who persecute you, rejoice with those who rejoice, weep with those who weep, on and on and on. We can take those passages and we can list them out and we can say, okay, this is what you have to do. These are your demands that are expected on you so that you can pay Jesus back for what he did for you. This is the least that you do. All of these right here. And so we look at it and we think, okay, here we go, up and down the list. Over and over and over again. And then what religion also does, they make it even harder on you because they tell you how you can do it. You see this list of what we're supposed to do and how we're supposed to act and not act, and you think, how in the world am I supposed to do all that? And religion says, here's how. You have to die to self. You have to die to yourself. Anybody ever heard that before? You have to die to yourself. It comes from 2 Corinthians or 1 Corinthians where Paul says that I face, or he says, I die daily. He talks about this whole scene where he's going around preaching the gospel and there are people who are persecuting him. He says, I die daily. So from that, they've pulled it out. Religion has pulled that out and said, now you have to die daily. But he's talking about physical death and physical persecution. It's not even what he's talking about. You go back to Romans 8, it's the same idea and sentiment where he says, we face death every day. We face death daily. Because he's preaching the gospel in a region that is persecuting those who preach the gospel. We pull that out and we say, oh, you got to die to self. And another passage that's pulled out that's mistaught and misunderstood in this concept is in Matthew, where Jesus says, take up your cross and follow me. So what have we been taught? That we have to crucify ourselves, right? Because Jesus said, take up your cross and follow me. So now we have to crucify ourselves so that we do these things and we don't do these things. But that's not what he says. He says, if you want to save your life, then you will lose it. If you want to lose your life, then you will save it. And he's talking about taking up your cross and following him to Calvary. Because when we put our faith in Jesus, and to use the Christianese that we talk about, you're saved. And I don't mean that like unbelievers don't even know what that means. Like you talk to your friends, you say, are you saved? Like, what are you talking about? Saved from what? That doesn't make any sense. But we are saved. We become new. We put our faith in him. But what God does is he takes that old person, that old self, and he does something to it. And when we look at the passage and we hear somebody say that you have to die to self, here's my encouragement to you. The next time somebody says that, ask them, what do you do with Romans 6? Because look at what Paul says. Our old self was crucified with him. Well, we have to die to self. Well, Romans says that my old self has already been crucified and put to death. How do I put that to death? Well, and then you start doing that religious dance that you have to do to explain away what you're talking about. But Paul says in that same passage where he talks about the same book of the Bible, where he talks about what it looks like for us to live this life here in this world, he wants to make sure that we understand that it's not a matter of dying to self, that our old self has been done away with. Look at what he says in Galatians. I have been crucified with Christ. Past tense, it's been done. Colossians, look at what he says. You have died. You have died. So if you put your faith in Jesus, you have died. Yourself has been put to death. Stop trying to die to self, because you can't. It's an exercise in futility because you're trying to do something that has already been done. It's a little uncomfortable for some of you because you've been told you have to die to self your whole life. But here's what I know. You know you can't do it. And if you're here and you're an unbeliever, you've yet to put your faith in Jesus, and you're searching for hope, you know and understand that when somebody tells you and puts religious demands on you and says, hey, in order for you to receive whatever it is they're telling you can receive, then you have to do this. You know in your mind you can't do it. and you look and you see us as believers, we don't always do what we say we should do. And you think they can't do it. They say they believe in Jesus. I know I can't do it. What's the point? It's an understanding that operating system in you, that powered you before, as an unbeliever, you're here today, that is leading you through this life. You put your faith in Jesus, God does away with that. God removes it from the picture. He crucifies it. When we sing about death was arrested and my life began, Jesus went into the grave and he walked out with freedom in his hand, my freedom, my life in his hand. It's because I was crucified with him. I took up my cross. I followed Jesus to Calvary. I was crucified. I was put to death. I died, and then I was buried, and then I was raised from the dead with Jesus when he walked out of that grave, physically overcoming death so that you and I could live today, here and now. And when you talk about dying to self and you talk about being crucified, and you know when you understand that I can't even do it even if I want to, Matt, and I read through and I look at it and I see it and I know I can't. You say that I am crucified with him, and I'm going through this life trying to understand more and more what that is and what that means. What does that look like in my life? Because that's what you want to know, isn't it? I mean, really, all of us, we want to know, what does that mean for Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday and Thursday and Friday and Saturday and Sunday? What does that mean in my life? If I've been crucified with Christ, if it's no longer I that live, then what does that look? What am I supposed to do? Paul gives us this picture in this context of these passages that we're talking about. And for so many of us, where we want to know what that means and what that looks like, and what we're supposed to do with that. He doesn't, when he says that you have died and you have been crucified, he doesn't say, okay, now you owe God something. Now the least you can do is live for him. No, it's deeper than that. Look at what he says in Romans. If we have died with Christ, we will live with him. Galatians. The life I now live, I live by faith in Jesus. The same passage he says, I have been crucified with Christ. He doesn't say, now the least I can do is live for Jesus. He doesn't say, now I owe him something that I've got to live out. No, he says, I've been crucified. Now the life I live by my faith in him. Colossians 3. Now your life is hidden with Christ. It's hidden. It's no longer you who lives. It's Christ who lives in you, because Christ is your life. Christ is living out your life, what he's done in you. It's not a matter of what you can do for him, because we can't do anything for him, especially in regards to paying off a debt that we had, because the wages of sin is death. How do we pay that debt off? You can't. So God sent his son Jesus to pay the debt, and now we believe. And now our life that we live, that's hidden with Christ, understand that our life is Christ. And before we even start talking about what it looks like next week, the fourth week after the following week, before we even start trying to paint a picture of what our life in Christ might look like, we're going to set it up by understanding one simple truth that the Apostle Paul wrapped all this up. These same passages, you go back and read them yourself today. These same passages where he tells us what it looks like. He tells us what to do. He tells us what not to do. He gives us instruction on how to live our lives, how to be what we're called to be. He gives us these instructions. Within that context, he wanted you to understand that you have died, that you have been set aside, that this is not you who can do this. He wants you to understand that you've been united together with Christ, that your life is hidden in him. But then he makes some things very clear. And there's one theme that he goes back to over and over and over in these books to make sure that we understand that when we start asking, what's the least we can do? Tell me what to do and I'll do it. Because if we get this laundry list of things to do, chances are we're not going to remember all of them. Let's go look and see what he says. Romans. Owe nothing to anyone except to love one another. For he who loves his neighbor has fulfilled the law. Jesus said this. Shall not commit adultery, shall not murder, shall not steal, shall not covet. Any other commandment, Jesus wraps it up like this. Love your neighbor as yourself. It's all summed up in this way. Love your neighbor as yourself. But hold on, here's what I think for some of us, this is what's hard, and this is how we're going to start next week. You can't love your neighbor as yourself because you don't love yourself. You don't love yourself. And I believe it's because you don't know what God has to say about who you are. That you're listening to the world around you tell you who you are and what you're doing is right or wrong. And you're listening to anybody and everybody that will tell you what you want to hear or that will express certain things and let them speak lies into your life that you're not worthy, that you're not acceptable, that you can't do enough, that God can't be happy with you, and you're not listening to what God has to say about who you are, so you don't love yourself. You love your neighbor as yourself. I hate myself. I'm going to hate my neighbor. He says, love your neighbor as yourself. We'll start off with that next week. Then he goes on, finishes this way. Love does no wrong to a neighbor. Love is the fulfillment of the law. You go into Galatians chapter 5, same book we talked about. What it looks like. We've been crucified. Look at what he says. There's this argument, this conversation going on between Jews and Gentiles about the demands that have been put on them about what they have to do and don't have to do to be accepted in the fellowship and the faith. It says in Christ Jesus, neither circumcision nor uncircumcision means anything, but faith working through love. Context of this passage, you've got believing Jews who had been crucified, who had been circumcised, that was the sign of their belonging to God. And so when Jesus came and proclaimed by grace through faith, you're saved, you believe in me, you'll not perish. Well, then the Jews wanted to bring in some of their demands into the faith and say, okay, you accepted Jesus, but now you've got to be circumcised. You think, it doesn't really mean anything to us, but if you're a grown man who's never been circumcised, and then somebody comes in and says, okay, you put your faith in Jesus, now you have to be circumcised, I'd say it's probably a pretty big deal. Probably no bigger deal than those who accepted Jesus 2 weeks prior to this conversation. I said, why couldn't we talk about this 2 weeks ago? Paul, this would have been good to know. Some of y'all get that a little bit later. Paul comes in and says, guys, none of that matters. None of that matters when we're talking about our salvation and our faith in Jesus. It says the only thing that matters is your faith, and it's expressed in love. He says it this way in Colossians 3, right after he says these things right here. Look at this. Colossians 3. He says, this is a reminder, we said this earlier in the day, put on a heart of compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, patience, bearing one another, forgiving each other. Whoever has a complaint against anyone, just as the Lord forgave you, so also should you. After talking about all those things, he says, beyond all these things. Now, why would he give that disclaimer? Well, you've heard a preacher say, hey, if you don't hear anything else today, hear this. Why do we say that? Because we know you're making your grocery list and you're passing notes about lunch and you're thinking about how to not beat your kid for smarting off to you before church. And I get it, right? I mean, and sometimes these long-winded preachers go long and you're like, oh, can you shut up already? So it's like, hey, takeaway. Look, I want you to get this if you don't get anything else. Look at what Paul says. Paul says, if you don't get anything, all that stuff I just said, if you don't get any of that, get this. Put on love, which is the perfect bond of unity. Be humble, be gentle, be kind, be patient, forgive one another, on and on and on and on. If you don't get any of that, just love other people. Because when we look for the lowest demand, we're looking for the least we have to do. Paul says, okay, you want to know the least that you would have to do? It's to love others, to put on love, to love others as you love yourself. Because if you're asking that, if that's the least to do, it's the most demanding. Because it goes above and beyond a list of do's and don'ts. It goes above and beyond paying back a debt we think we owe. How many of you guys have paid off a card and then sent an extra $200 to the finance company? Oh, nobody? Huh. How many of you have paid off a credit card and then sent a little bit extra into the credit card company? No, nobody in the first service either. So weird. Because when you owe a debt, you pay whatever you have to pay it off. And that's it. We don't owe Jesus anything. We don't have to live for him because he died for us. We live for him because he is in us. And his love comes out in our lives. And when we're looking for what it is that we have to do and asking, just tell me what to do, Matt. Tell me what to do and I'll do it. I'm going to tell you to love people in a way that makes them curious about Jesus. And you think, great, here he goes again. That's because above everything else, put on love. Above everything else, love your neighbor as yourself. Because our lives were never intended to be reduced to a minimum of just the least we can do and the least we can get by with. Our lives are meant to be maximized by loving other people. And so as we move forward in this series and we talk about what it looks like, actual, practical, outpouring manifestation, life, living, what that looks like in our lives, I want you to shift your mind. I want us all to move away from just tell me what to do and I'll do it. What's the least that I have to do? And I want us to lean on this question. It's going to guide us through these next 3 weeks. What does love demand? What does love demand of me? And that's what's going to be the guiding force for these next 3 weeks. And what I hope is the guiding direction and force in our lives beyond the next 3 weeks, in our lives, each and every day. Because when we ask the question, how in the world am I supposed to do what I do? Am I supposed to be who I'm supposed to be? Am I supposed to live? Am I supposed to walk in a manner worthy of my calling here in this world? We revert back. Answer this question. What does love demand? Let me pray. Father, thank you for today. Thank you for your word, for your clarity. Father, for your son Jesus that you gave to us so that we have the power to love and to go above and beyond the minimum requirement that others may try to put on us. And that it's not done out of a sense of paying a debt back. It's done out of a sense of desire to want to live a life that would be an expression of you in us. God, I pray as we walk through these next 3 weeks and we look at what that might look like as we paint this picture. God, I pray that our eyes are open more and more to who we are as children of yours and what you have to say about who we are and about how that affects our lives each and every day. It's in your name we pray. Amen.